All right, everyone. All right, thank you again, and we apologize for the inconvenience. So we will restart our grants in aid of research Q&A. I am Janelle Simmons, manager of programs, and when we started previously, we had heard from some of our reviewers. I know the last person that did not have an opportunity to introduce himself is Padu Padaviraman. Hopefully, I pronounced it correctly. Thanks. So if you can just say your name, your title, and how long you've been reviewing grants.
Thank you. So, hi everybody. I'm actually an assistant professor at Indiana University at Indianapolis, and I am in the Department of Ophthalmology. So obviously, I review the vision grants, and I've been reviewing grants in Sigma Psi from 2013, if I remember right. I did one time in 2011, but then I jumped. So I've been reviewing continuously grants at Sigma Psi from 2013 onwards. Um, yeah, so I do vision research grants.
Okay, great. And we will touch on vision grants a little bit later, as that is a very popular question that we do receive from many of our potential applicants. So, one of the things I wanted to do was first introduce the grants in aid of research, which we call GIAR for short. So, we award research grants to, of course, undergraduate students, master students, and doctoral students. And we administer these grant programs twice a year in the fall and in the spring. So currently we are in our spring cycle of applications, and the deadline to submit those applications are March 15th, 11:59 p.m. Pacific. So later on, at the conclusion of the session, I will have a slide with that information as to where you can access the grants in aid of research application. You can apply more than once, but you cannot receive a grant more than twice. So if you are awarded 1 year, you can reapply for the second year. And after that, you are no longer eligible. But if you have applied more than once, more than twice, and still have not been funded, you are able to apply again. So we have various amounts of grants. So we have the maximum for most areas of science and engineering, it is $1,000. Any students conducting vision research can receive $2,500, and any students conducting uh, astronomy research will receive $5,000. So funds come from, from many sources. We have a partnership with the National Academy of Sciences and the San Antonio Lighthouse for the blind and vision impaired, in addition to donors in other areas. So I did want to provide that information um, at this time. Now, one of the things that we will ask, so in order to submit a question, we do have some questions that we received ahead of time. Please be sure to post your question to the chat. So I will read those questions in the chat, and we will try to address as many of them as we can during this session. So thank you all for coming and being a part of our Q&A. So one of the questions I'll actually ask, and I can respond to this one, it's a question that I receive many times in my email is GIAR a scholarship? And the answer is no, it's not a scholarship. It is a grant, a research grant for students conducting scientific research. So if you know anyone that says they're looking for a scholarship and they're thinking, well, Sigma Xi has scholarships, you just want to let them know that we do not. We provide grants for students that are currently enrolled in a program and conducting scientific research. So that is the answer for that question. So Sigma Xi does not offer scholarships. It is actually just research grants. So that is our first question. So the next question I am going to ask Stephanie Bingham. So this is a message, an email we received. And what level of scientific detail are reviewers expecting the methodology and hypothesis to be? So we'll just start with that part of the question. It's like a 2, 3 part question, but if you can just address that part. So we will unmute.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So the level of detail, it's a relatively short application. So there needs to be a level of clarity, but it also needs to be concise. And so you want to leave out extraneous details that are not going to help the reader understand the rationale for the study that you're performing. So, for example, with the hypothesis, let's look at that. Um, we need to understand the rationale behind the hypothesis and understand that it's not a fishing expedition, right? Um, there is a reason behind you thinking that this is a direction in which you would like to take the research and you'd like to investigate this particular question. And so the rationale is absolutely critical. The other detail with your experimental design or methodology will need to include, the details will need to include, for example, the sample sizes. Is the information that you're planning to collect, is the data going to be something that you can actually determine, for example, statistical relevance with? So something as simple as explaining how many times it's going to be replicated, the sample size, those are little details that can sometimes be overlooked that are incredibly helpful in letting us know whether the research design is sound and can actually address the questions that you are setting out to address.
Okay, thank you. So the second part now is, will more complex projects be less funded even if there is a large amount of preliminary data?
So preliminary data is actually part of helping you to build the case, right, and your rationale for continuing the study. So preliminary data is not going to hurt you, but you need to perhaps choose the components of the preliminary data that you're going to share or the format, so that it does not take away from you then being able to explain the next phase of the project, right, and that you're seeking the funding for. So there needs to be a balance. You need to lay the foundation for the studies that you're setting out to perform or conduct, but then you need to provide enough details on the actual upcoming studies that will be performed.
Okay, thank you. So now our next question will be for Peter Harries, our chair of the Committee for Sigma Xi Grants and Aid of Research. So I submitted the proposal for this grant twice, and the reviewer comments I improved for the proposal the next time, and it was rejected. Should I apply for this grant a third time, and what can I do to improve the chances of getting awarded?
I mean, I think we don't limit the number of times students apply for the grant. I think in many cases, the committee works hard to try to improve grants. I mean, it's certainly not a review process in terms of the feedback like NSF, but I would say, really take to heart what the reviewers are saying and think about how you might change your proposal to accommodate those elements. I mean, there's some bubble, you should get bubble feedback and also other types. So, take that to heart and really think about what that means. I just want to go back to and talk a little bit about something that Stephanie said about methods, because one of the things that we often see are people suggesting to go to really exotic and nice places where we'd all like to go. But many times that research could potentially be performed in your backyard. So, if you're going to some place exotic, really make the case as to why that's the place you need to go for this project. And it doesn't just look like you want to have a nice beach vacation.
Mm, very interesting point. Thank you, Peter. Now, this next question is for all of our panelists. So this question, and we'll start with Cecil. What is the most important thing to each reviewer who is present in this session? So Cecil, can you respond first?
Oh, he needs to be unmuted.
Yep, he's being unmuted.
Oh, there we go. Um, the most important thing, gee, that's a broad question, but let me see if I can be precise. The question being asked, your entire purpose is to answer some question. So I look for, the very first thing is hypothesis. I don't go for the title, it's what are the research questions first, and I build out from there. So we all want to know the why, the what, the when, the where. So make the question strong, make your research statement strong, and build from there. That's what I look for first.
Thank you. Next, Purdue, can you answer the same question?
So normally what I look for in a proposal is the way in which the background is laid, so that if they have enough, like if they're able to, if the person who's writing the grant, if they're able to see the holes in the science and then go back and try to plug those holes based on their preliminary data and how they created the hypothesis based on that. So that's how I look at a proposal. And methodology is very important, but sometimes you cannot write the whole thing. They can always cite from established journals, established publications. Otherwise, I think the background with the major holes in the field and how the work from this or the project proposal is going to plug those holes, or not all the holes, some of those. Yeah.
Thank you. Stephanie, same question. What is the most important thing to you? And go.
And it'll go back to the same thing I said before, the rationale, the research question and the rationale behind it. What's the foundation for the study that you're planning to embark on or planning to expand? After looking at the research question and the hypothesis, the next will be how you're going to approach answering that question. So it's a bit of a two-parter for me.
Okay, thank you. And Peter.
I think for me, if I, as I agree with all of my colleagues, I think to a certain degree, the proposals, as Stephanie mentioned, are pretty short. So it's really sort of how you build an effective narrative where it's clear where your project fits into the broader question, and why sort of the study that you're suggesting is the next logical step or maybe significant jump in the research that's going on. And so I think it's really how you apply the context and then add testable, important hypotheses to it. I think, sometimes we read hypotheses that are like, yeah, that's going to be true no matter what. That's really not what we're looking for. We're looking for where it's clear you're sort of pushing the envelope. So, I saw something in the chat about high risk, high reward. I mean, I wouldn't say that, all the grants that we do address that, but I think we are looking for something innovative. It doesn't necessarily have to be high risk, but I think being cutting edge in the discipline and really showing that you're moving the discipline or your area forward is a really critical piece. And how you construct the story around it is super important.
And the question that was also asked in the chat was how many reviewers read each proposal? And the answer is 2. However, there are times where if the 2 reviewers have a question about this proposal and are trying to determine whether or not it should be funded, a third person will be asked to read as well. I don't know if Peter, if you wanted to provide any more insight on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think obviously the review process is a critical piece of this. And just to go into some of those details a little bit further, basically, reviewers read a set of proposals together, and they have to basically agree ultimately on which proposals are worth funding. I mean, I'm not saying that there's always from the outset total agreement, but there's lots of discussions of the individual proposals after they've been read to determine, between the two reviewers, which ones are ultimately the best. Sometimes one reviewer sees something that another reviewer overlooked, and so that's really part of the whole process that we really use to maintain sort of quality control, and also to ensure that a proposal's not being only looked at by one person, that there are two eyes on it, and just because people have different perspectives and different strengths and so on, and so we want to balance that out and make sure they're, you put a lot of time into reading them, writing them, we want to put that time into giving you constructive feedback and evaluating them as fairly as possible.
Thank you. Now, this question is actually for Purdue, and it's about vision science, vision research applications. And if you can just talk about the types of vision science proposals that are, normally funded, and what you look for as a reviewer for that discipline.
So normally what we do is we just go with whatever comes in, right? We have different types of proposals coming in. Let me tell you what the outlier is in this first. That way people know what they shouldn't be putting into vision. So there are some proposals which are more a psychology proposals or an ecology proposal or a physics proposal. But what they do is they just bring in a vision aspect, like say they are measuring something related to vision, and they put that in vision science. That we don't consider, or we don't even, we kind of not review that. We say this is out of scope of the vision grant. So that's done. And then what we like, what we read, we enjoy are the ones that has basic science, physiology of vision science, uh, basic biology of vision science, translation aspects, new discoveries, drug discoveries, all these that are very pertaining to vision research. Either it can be a disease oriented or a basic fundamental biology, like disease in the sense like glaucoma, macular degeneration, or cataract. The other things like developmental biology, which comes under the basic fundamental biology, like development of lens, development of retina. All these come under the vision research proposals that we review and we score them. And as as Janil said, we are two people who are reviewing the grants. If there is a conflict of interest, or if there is something that is not coming in consensus, then we go with a third reviewer.
Okay. Thank you. So Megan Perry is also here, one of our reviewers. And the question that I want to ask her is, what is the most common mistake you see in applications?
Oh, thank you. Basically, the one thing that people often don't think to do, because they think it's kind of obvious to themselves, is that they don't link the research question to their data. So you might have a research question, right? But you don't really think, and you're collecting data, but you don't think about how, and I shouldn't say you, because I'm not saying you're going to do this, but sometimes people don't think about what their data is going to look like in order to answer their research question, right? So how will you know, that X is going to result in Y? I mean, what is your data going to look like to actually be able to say that? I mean, sometimes it's, a statistical test, but sometimes it might be something that requires a little more description. So yeah, linking the research questions to the actual data.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Now, Cecil, my question to you is in regards to methods in a proposal, and how do you determine what is sufficient for the methodology section of a proposal?
Okay, thank you. Janine, it says that you have to unmute me, so I was waiting for you to do that. So, okay.
Yes, I did.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have seen basic issues of here is my method, but nothing about participants, how you chose them, what you plan to do with them. It should be a recipe of, if I want to repeat what you've done, I'm going to go by what you're saying here. And oftentimes I see a lot of detail missing from that. So I tried to comment and say, next time you do this, please spend more time telling me how this method will test your questions. And in doing so, I'm clear on what you're doing. Otherwise, I have to think for you, and I don't know what you were thinking.
Okay, thank you. Now, what the next set of questions, some of them I want to focus on is what is considered a fundable expense. We get that many times, and we have so many different scenarios that are brought to us. So, Peter, I'd like to ask you about this one.
Yeah, I
So,
think this is, I mean, I think as Janelle says, this is something
Mhm.
we actually talk quite a bit about as a committee,
yes,
and work on trying to figure out what we do and don't fund. Let me give you a few of the basic things that are often overlooked or included that shouldn't be. And that relates to, for instance, if you're doing field work, we do not pay for a field assistant. So, that's one thing straight off the, that lots of people still include in their budgets that we don't fund. Another thing that we tend not to fund unless you really make the case for it are things that are considered to be normal consumables in a lab. So if our thought is that those are just needed anyways and should be part of what's available. And there is some gray area there. I'm not gonna say there isn't, but if you're going to ask for things that seem to be pretty typical, you need to make the case in your budget justification. And I think the budget justification is the thing that people often overlook to do effectively. That needs to be mentioned there. Other things that we don't pay we won't fund are anything related to basically computers and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I think and software falls into that category as well. So it really needs to revolve around things that might be, are relatively unique to the project, or things that aren't there. One of the things that we do allow, for instance, is samples that need to be run at other places where the capacity just doesn't exist at your institution. But let's just say you need some light isotopic work done, and there's a cost for that. We do allow elements like that to be included in the budget. So I think that's just a basic overview. There's a lot more details related to that on, if you read the instruction part, there's many more details related to those elements. But
Mhm.
one of the things that I saw in the chat, and this sort of relates to it, is, yeah, I mean, in many cases, the money from Sigma Xi is only going to be a portion of the funding that you might be requesting to do a project. And, one thing that you should do there is to, when you're doing your budget, show what you're asking Sigma Xi to fund. I mean, I think this goes back to a comment that Cecil made. Don't make us be mind readers. Make it abundantly clear to us what you're asking for from Sigma Xi and what you may be requesting from other sources.
So, would COVID testing, so there's someone doing field work outside of the US and they're required to take COVID tests, in that country, and it has to be paid out of pocket. Given the current climate, would those tests be considered a fundable expense?
I mean, I think just given the situation, if you can get to the place that you're trying to get to and there's a quarantine, I think you need to think about what that whole budget is going to look like. If you're going to have to quarantine for 2 weeks before you can get any work done, I don't think we're going to be paying for a quarantine budget, just because that just isn't probably in the cards in most places, given what the funding is. So, I mean, I think we would include a COVID test, but there just needs to be a realistic budget in terms of, you know, is that really a viable place to go at this moment to get the research done?
And animal models, such as guinea pigs.
I mean, in terms of using animals, I mean, that certainly is things that are funded, but there is a part where we ask for if basically some sort of institutional body needs to approve the research protocol. So for mammals, that would be IACUC. For human subjects, that would be IRB. That really needs to be in place before you submit the proposal. I mean, the ethics of research is one of the thrusts of Sigma's Eye. So you need to have done your homework beforehand, or we're not going to fund a project that doesn't have those pieces in place.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a big question. And one of the questions we've also received ahead of time was, when will we get funds if awarded? So for the spring cycle, usually by June or so, the funds will be dispersed. So the way the process works, if you are funded, you will receive an email from me stating the status and the process of completing a grant disbursement form. And then there is a deadline, of course, to complete that grant disbursement form. So providing that you submit that form on time is when you will receive funds in early to mid-June. If you do not submit it on time, there's two things that can happen. You will get it late, or if you wait too long, you will not be able to receive the funds and you would have to start the whole process over and reapply for the grant. So definitely keep that in mind, and that you check your emails. And sometimes emails do go into spam folders, so check that as well, because I have heard students receiving those notifications in their spam mail. So next, the question we have is, what research disciplines can clinician scientists select on the application? So I'll see if Stephanie, if you would be able to answer that question. And I will
Okay. Okay. And I may need some help here from Peter, but with clinician scientists, we don't actually have, Peter, do we have a specific category for clinicians? So this is for basic science research. So unfortunately, this would not be an appropriate mechanism for you.
Thank you. And now, oh yes, Purdue, yes,
So
please.
if they have a research project which
Vision.
fits into translational research or basic science, I mean, they can very well apply for that, right?
Yeah, I think they would have to be, you have to think about how you're structuring your proposal and how it fits into the categories that we have. I mean, if it's sort of a human health type thing or related to elements like that, it doesn't fit into the categories that we have. So the clinical side can be a bit challenging, but I agree completely with Padu. If there's a way that you can frame your proposal in terms of basic science, it certainly wouldn't be excluded as long as it fit into the categories that we have.
Would that also include then STEM education?
STEM education really doesn't fit into, I mean, we don't really have an education category. So, maybe you could do it from a psychological perspective. Cecil, please chime in. But, that's not a thrust of what we're funding right now.
And actually, speaking of Cecil and psychology, I do wanted to ask him in terms of what type of psychology proposals that you look for. I don't think many people realize that we do have not just cell biology and biochemistry, vision, ecology, but we have psychology. So I would like for Cecil to talk about what he looks for in psychology, but we also have anthropology, and I do want Megan to share that information as well. So I'll have Cecil talk about what he looks for in psychology applications. So I just sent you the.
Okay, here we go.
Hi, Janelle. Hi, everyone. This is Iman. May I ask that all panelists can remain unmuted? Thank you.
Okay, then I will remain unmuted. To go back to Stephanie and Peter, clinical studies come through my proposal pack a lot. And what I ask of the student is, what are your research questions? And there are none. So if there are none, and I have to score those questions, I tend to stop right there. If you're doing a fantastic program to help someone do X, Y, Z, I think that's wonderful, but you aren't testing questions. So just like any other area, psychology has a science to it. So we ask of our folk too, what are your clear and clean research questions? And I have some very good proposals coming through, but also some of them are clinical, and I want to build this brand new scale of self-concept. Well, great idea, but not sure that that can be done through this mechanism.
Thank you, Cecil.
Of course.
And Megan, if you can talk about what you look for in the anthropology proposals.
Sure. That's actually very similar to what Cecil said. So, some aspects of anthropology are more sort of traditional hard science, like biological anthropology, primatology. But we also take, more social science aspect of anthropology, the, cultural anthropology type of proposals. And those are the ones that where people tend to have a little harder time articulating not only the research questions, but also their methods and their sample selection. And this is, so as long as you make it, have those basics, I guess, elements of a scientific proposal, it's, perfectly acceptable for this program. So, specify how many individuals you're going to talk to, as I think somebody said before, maybe it'll see so as well, specify why you're selecting these individuals. Is it an opportunistic sample? Is it targeted for some reason? And what kind of data are you collecting? Is it quantitative, qualitative? Be sure you're very specific about, your research questions and your methods.
Thank you. Now, a question that we have received, are engineering life science proposals a good fit for this program, since Sigma Xi heavily leans on pure biology in my observation?
I mean, I'd be happy to answer that one. And I think, we have an engineering division, as a geologist, I'm not quite sure what, that we lean so heavily into pure biology. There's certainly a wide range of different fields, as can be seen on this panel here, that the grants encompass. And so, I mean, I think engineering life science proposals that are hypothesis driven and well developed have are a perfect fit for Sigma Xi. In fact, we could use more engineering proposals. I mean, we tend not to get very many of them, and often the ones that we get are asking for computers. So I think, good engineering proposals that follow the directions and the guidelines of Sigma Xi would be great.
Thank you. So we have a question in regards to the proposal. It was mentioned previously, Peter had mentioned that the proposal is 500 words. And does that include figure captions? And the answer is no. So figure captions are not included in the 500 word limit. So keep that in mind. figure captions are not included, and neither are, any citations, titles, they're not included in the proposal.
And let me give you a dirty secret here. Neither is the budget justification. So oftentimes, that can be a place where maybe you didn't feel like you had enough room in the proposal to talk about everything, but I probably shouldn't be telling you this. You're probably gonna get like 15-page budget descriptions. I mean, they need to be of a reasonable length, but there are some ways that you can use that budget justification to your advantage. And I would say more often than not, participants don't. And that can often torpedo a great proposal if there's no real articulation of why things are being asked for. And I'll just give you one other tip. When you're doing your budget, make sure it corresponds to your proposal. We get quite a few proposals where all of a sudden people are asking for things that aren't directly related to what we read in the proposal itself, and it kind of leaves you scratching your head. So make sure there's a direct connection between that.
Thank you. And something that has not really been mentioned much, but I think it is a very important part of the application process, is the recommendation form. So there was a question in the chat in regards to how many recommendations are needed. And in the recommendation form, you only need to submit one. Now, of course, there's some that have asked, well, I have my research advisor and someone else that knows my character. Can they submit something? And they could. They are able to, well, you are able to upload additional documents as part of the application. But the most important part that the reviewers will look at is that recommendation form. So there's only one. And one question that has come up is, and here's the scenario: I'm a student, I'm starting research with this brand new advisor, I've never worked with them before. So can I use my previous advisor to complete the recommendation form? So who can tackle that? Peter, are you able to, or Cecil?
Yeah, I can tackle that. I mean,
okay.
I think one of the questions related to that would be, how then does that proposal relate to what you're doing now? I mean, if you've moved to another institution, let's say, to start, you were an undergrad somewhere, if it's a continuation of your undergrad project and there's some parts that still need to be done, I think, overall, you want to pick the person who knows the project the best. And I think that's actually more important than, someone who might know you personally the best. So I would, I think that's a choice that you need to make in terms of where the project is originating and who can really speak to the value of the project. I mean, it's not to say that those pieces of information about you as a person aren't important. They are, but it's ultimately being able to speak to the value of the project.
Thank you. And I wanted to make sure that applicants know that it's not a letter that we are requiring. In previous cycles, a few years back, the recommendation letter from the advisor was required and was uploaded. Now, at this time, what happens is the student sends a link to the advisor through the grant software, and they receive a link to a form that they actually complete and answer questions related to the knowledge that you have in working with the project.
And I just want to go back to something, Janelle, you talked about that, yeah, they could upload an additional document. I don't think that that's to your advantage. This is not sort of a quantity, the heft of the package measurement. It ultimately really hinges on the project as described in your description. And I'm speaking for myself here, and maybe the others would agree. I would probably look negatively on an additional letter, because why? And it's not something that we're requesting from other people. I think other things like thinking about figures and things like that we have in there, that's much more important than another letter.
I agree with what Peter said. If your person who's doing your letter talks in vague terms about how great life is, and we then know that they don't know who you are. So we can tell from what they're saying about you if they know you. So you want to find someone who knows how hard you work and just what you're doing. And Peter, I agree. I don't want any more letters. Just tell me who the person is and what their qualities are, and I go from there. And to me, that can be very concise.
Yeah, and I think that there's a reason we went from 2 letters to 1. Sorry, Padu, I didn't mean to cut you off, but we as a committee decided that 1 was sufficient.
And the other thing is, these are proposals that deal with science, hypothesis. So unless you have done some work in the lab and started your research and got on with it and climbed up towards framing your hypothesis and writing a full-fledged proposal, it won't be a great thing for a person to write a letter if they don't know you, right? If you have been in a lab, you have been going through all this process, and then the PI or your mentor know very well about you. They have the inclination to write a letter for you telling that, yeah, this person is really good, very dedicated, they can successfully complete this project. That's the most important thing in a letter. Like, the person has the capacity to successfully complete the project if you're provided with the money. So that should come from the mentor, basically.
And just seeing, I saw, in the chat, so the letter should address the project or the person. Basically, we have prompts for the letter writer so that they cover those pieces. So we've gone away,
Exactly.
I think last year was the first time we did that. We've gone away from just asking for a letter and now ask for much more targeted responses from your recommender so that we get the information that we feel we need to evaluate you as a scientist and a person.
So for any research advisors that may be in this session right now and may have 2 or more students that they work with, and they each are interested in applying for the grant and aid of research, what advice, how can they do that if they're all under the same research advisor?
In
Let
Vision
me give
grants,
you
we
some.
get this
Oh, go
all
ahead.
the time. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
What
Go
I
ahead.
meant to say was, in Vision research grants, we get this all the time. At least, like, we get 3 proposals. I mean, three PIs having 2 students each from their lab applying. This is like, and we keep scratching our head as to how do you see. And they do, some of them have a very clear mention telling that no one is, I mean, like, there is another person for whom I'm writing this letter, like similar letter from the same lab. Some of them don't even mention that. So that is kind of, we don't know. Oh, okay, we don't know what exactly is the reason why they didn't put that. Either they forgot about it, or so. I mean, I would say the PIs to be very honest about it, whatever they are writing. So that way we can evaluate the students. If this proposal originated from an original idea from the student, or if there was a passover from a previous student, and this person just like got onto that project and worked through the way, those kind of information would really help in deciding.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give some examples from the past of what not to do. We had an advisor once who submitted basically the same letter for every student who they were supporting, and all they did was change the name. I mean, we want to know about the individual, and these things do get caught. Maybe people don't think they will, but that was pretty distressing. And I think, as Padu said, we asked advisors specifically if they're recommending other, how many people are you recommending? And we also asked them to rank them. And, a lot of advisors hedge their bets because it's sort of like Solomon's baby and hard to choose one student over another. But usually we get some response. But I mean, it's difficult to deal with when the advisor has written more than one and they've ignored the question.
Now, a question that I received is about Sigma Xi membership and if that's a requirement to apply for the grant in aid of research. So they said, as I don't personally know any members of Sigma Xi, I'm wondering if there is an application that I can submit to become a member. So we do have funds that are designated for members of Sigma Xi, whether that is the student or the research advisor. However, students who are not members of Sigma Xi can apply for the grant. There are some grants through our National Academy of Sciences that does not have a specification as to whether or not the applicant or the advisor is a Sigma Xi member. But we also welcome applicants to join Sigma Xi and can apply during the application process. And there is a part of the application where we ask about your membership status, and you can say that you have submitted an application, it's pending, or you're not a member. So it is not a requirement to become a member of Sigma Xi, but we would love to have you consider and join and be a companion of zealous research. So then someone has asked about the primary intent of the grant. Is it to encourage the independent thinking of a grad student who wants to test their research idea or to provide additional funding to an existing project? And I wanted to see if Stephanie would be able to answer that question.
Sure, I'll jump in here. The goal is to fund good, sound scientific questions. Okay, so in some cases, it may be the graduate student who has developed their idea. And so, of course, we're encouraging that process, that development of the scientific process in that individual. But really, the goal is to fund sound science and to provide a launching pad then for you to be able to expand the studies. But sometimes you just need a bit of seed money, or sometimes you need to bridge a gap with a larger project. And we're here in either case.
Now, here's another question in regards to the grants. So someone has asked that there are such small grants, and yet it sounds like they get a lot of scrutiny under review. Is that really the case, or are they reviewed very quickly? So
We find a big
yes.
staircase and then we throw them all down that and see which ones go the furthest and then choose the, no, in all seriousness, I mean, I think as you can probably tell from this panel, we all take the review of these grants very seriously and really, you know, just to echo what's already been said by many of my colleagues, we are looking to fund the best, most exciting science that we can that is driven by well-defined hypotheses. And that also does have the ownership of the student. And it, you know, we can often tell from the way grants are written, whether the student has ownership of the project or whether they're just sort of tagged on to something and want some more money. So, you know, this is not just a really quick review or anything like that. It's very deliberative and very engaged by the people who are part of this. In non-COVID conditions, we all come together as a group and have lots of discussions, I mean, among ourselves to try to improve the process and also think about different flavors of things that we're seeing as we go through the process. So I don't know if any, I mean, happy to have anybody else add anything to that.
I would like to add that for some small schools, it's not a small grant. For some fairly small programs, it's a big deal for them. Do we rush through them? Is it a quick review? Heavens to Bessie, no. I mean, it's a lot of coffee involved, a lot of work involved, because we are trying to help folks understand what the science is as they go forward. So I think for some grantees, that's a big deal, that money is a big deal for their program.
Mm-hmm. I would say the same thing, that, you know, often it's, you know, if you just need a few, and that's where it becomes really helpful to have it for seed grants. You know, if you just need to run a few analyses first, just to make sure the samples that you have are viable or anything, you know, that allows you to do that. And then you have the basis for going on, perhaps getting larger amounts of money. I mean, I actually got one of these when I was a grad student, and it was to establish that the skeletal remains that I was looking at that actually dated to the period I was interested in. So I used it for carbon-14 dating, and then I was able to go on and get larger grants from that. But that was something I had to prove first, right? And then in terms of reviewing things quickly, I mean, we do have a lot to get through. And in that case, I think that's, and maybe Cecily, you said this before, it's, you know, if you run into a proposal where, you know, all of a sudden there's really no research question, you're really not going to think too much more about that proposal. So, you know, be very careful that you don't give us something that will turn us off. Yes. And, you know, and then we'll just, you know, kind of move on to the next one without, you know, I mean, we do give feedback to the proposals. And so we, you know, we try to spend a little time to do that if a proposal is missing an important element. But, you know, in general, yeah, be sure that there's not anything that would make us turn away, I guess.
Good point. Good point.
We have a couple more questions I would like for us to get through, and then we will have the panelists give some final words. And I thank you all who are attending and submitting your questions in the chat. We're trying to get to as many of those as possible. If you look in the chat, the link to become a member of Sigma Xi is in there. So make sure if you are not a member, you can click on that link and start that application process. So one of the questions, which is actually a pretty good question, and we have received quite a bit, is do you consider both national and international works for grants consideration, or only works that are undertaken within the USA? And the answer is both. So not just national, but international as well. And you don't have to be a US citizen either to apply for these grants. So we have grant awardees from all over the world. So hopefully that answers your question. Another question here, I mentored a few undergraduate students, 5 to be precise, and this kind of talked about what we mentioned earlier. 3 worked on the same project, and I asked them to let me know what their scores were. I realized that the least was 49, but no one was awarded. So is there any explanation for this? And this is a good question, because we sometimes have students that, you know, they look and their scores that may seem high, but at the same time, they were not funded. So let's talk about that. And it also is related to another question in regards to how competitive this process is. So Peter, would you like to address that?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we do because we value and acknowledge the difference between undergrads and graduate students is we actually evaluate the undergraduate students separately. So, I mean, I don't know what field you're in, but the only thing that I can say is, you know, in sort of answering that question about competitiveness, these are incredibly competitive grants. I think we ended up funding, what, about 20%, Janelle? Maybe a little bit lower.
A little bit less, anywhere between 12 to 15%.
So they are super competitive, and, you know, we're getting lots of great proposals, and we're trying to choose the best one. So the only thing that I can say is, you know, those were probably not the most competitive proposals that were submitted. I mean, unfortunately, we don't have the level of funding. You know, if you have $100 million gift you can give us to help fund this endeavor, I'm sure Iman and Janelle would take that right away, and that would allow us to fund more. But, you know, we have the resources that we have, and we try to distribute them as effectively as we can.
Thank you. Now, there have been a couple of questions about being able to look at grants that have been awarded. So unfortunately, we cannot, of course, due to that, you know, privacy, we can't just show you students' proposals that have been funded. But what would you recommend for someone who is still trying to visualize, how do I complete this proposal and it can be funded?
I mean, my suggestion would be, first and foremost, figure out if there's anyone on your campus who has been funded and ask them if you can look at their proposal, even if it's in a somewhat different discipline. So that's where I would start. I would certainly see whether there's faculty members on your campus who have been funded through Sigma Xi. That may be more difficult to determine. A lot of campuses have Sigma Xi chapters. Get in touch with the people on that. They may have some insights that can help you improve your proposal. And certainly Janelle, I know, gets a lot of questions because she sends them to me pretty regularly too. So it's not like, we're not trying to help people and answer questions, and, we're not trying to be secretive at all.
And the other thing is the reviewers actually comment. Even if you have like no help, go ahead and submit it the first time. The reviewers give their comments. They say, hey, you know what? Change it this way, put it this way. That's how we do for almost all the proposals that comes in. So that'll be of help if they absolutely don't get anything.
And I just saw there's something that came up on funding again. No, we don't fund conferences. We don't fund books. We don't fund tuition. We're focused on the mechanics of doing the science, not in presenting it and getting it published.
Thank you. So now at this time, I would like for each of our panelists to give some final words, as many of our students here are getting ready to submit or start that application, and maybe some of those advisors getting ready to, work on that recommendation. So I'll start with Cecil.
Thank you. I would recommend this, and I tell in my comments this exact same story to every student. Start with your research questions first, make them clear and concise, and build on that, because when you think about it, you have a method to test hypotheses. You have findings from testing. Everything is a hypothesis, so make sure that your inquiry, your questions are clear and concise, and build from there, and you can't go wrong. Don't go with what's popular, because that's different from science. Make those questions strong and build there, and you'll do just fine.
Thank you. Next, Padu.
So I have one piece of advice for all the young brains that are writing their grants. When you write a proposal, be very clear with the introduction, and then go to what are the holes that are there in the field that you're looking at, and then state your preliminary findings, hypothesis based on that premise, and then what methodology you're going to put in, and then what are the outcomes that you expect, or what would you do in the future. So this is what I would have, like 4 or 5 subheadings under which you can clearly explain your proposal, and then that actually makes it easy for us to review your grants. That's another thing I should say, because we review like 50, 60 proposals, and even if it's like 1 page, but still we have to take them through the whole process of reviewing and then seeing who is going to be funded and all that. So it'll be easy for us to make clear-cut decisions there. So yeah.
Thank you. Megan?
One thing maybe this is okay for me, so maybe I'm not, as a reviewer, so I hope I'm not speaking for other people, but sometimes let your references, speak for what you're wanting to say. So don't waste a lot of time, describing the background of, the research that you're going to undertake. Let the reference, if you don't feel like you need to take lots and lots of space to do that, because really what you want to focus on is what you're going to do. And so don't be afraid to just have a couple of sort of statements that, yes, this is going to work. Here are the references, and kind of leave it at that.
Okay. And Stephanie?
I'll end the way I started, with an emphasis on clarity and being concise as you explain the details. But I'll also recommend that you think of how to give a complete story. So think about all the elements that are needed and make sure you address them. So what's the research question? Why is this important? How are you going to approach the question? Jot down and make sure that you can check each of these and then close the loop at the end. Oftentimes, proposals will end, for example, with the statement, completion of these studies will add to the body of knowledge in XYZ. That's a very vague statement. It sounds good on the surface, but perhaps put some thought into how to close the loop at the very end of it. Okay, so give a complete story as you're crafting your grounds.
And finally, Peter, your words.
Now, I agree with what all my fellow reviewers have said, and I'm just going to add a few little pieces. I think in some ways related to what they have said. And the first is, I think, really important what Megan alluded to. You know, some people have proposals that where 2/3 of what's written is the intro. And then you only have a third to say what you're doing. We're more interested in what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, as opposed to, you know, spending a lot of time building the background. That background has to be there, but do it concisely. The other thing that I would say is let people read your proposal, especially the people who are writing the letters for you. We sometimes get letters that are, once again, it doesn't look like they've ever seen the project before. So have people read it, polish the proposal, and you know, the more eyes you can put on that proposal and get feedback from, you know, ultimately we're not giving you a huge amount of money. I think, you know, getting a Sigma grant, a Sigma Xi grant is certainly something that I still treasure. But ultimately, it's about learning the craft of proposal writing. I mean, that's really, we're trying to set a foundation where you're beginning to think about how to do that. Because if you're going to stay in the science world, proposal writing is going to be a part of your life. And, you know, having an initial success with places like Sigma Xi and other student grants that are out there is a great way to start that career, and certainly what we're looking to support. So, you know, take ownership of it, but get feedback and polish it.
Okay. Oh, this is a good question. I'll quickly address it. With Sigma Xi do professional development workshops or grant writing in the future? So we do this, and actually one of the ways we do this is through our student research conference, which takes place in the fall, and it will be November 4th through 7th in Niagara Falls, New York. So be on the lookout for more information about that. So I want to thank our panelists, Cecil McManus, Purdue Patabiroman, Peter Harris, Stephanie Bingham, Megan Perry. Thank you so much. And I wanted to share with our attendees some important reminders. So, one of the questions, when are applications due? So, March 15th, the application submission deadline is the spring cycle. And for that cycle, we usually make funding decisions mid-May. So just be on the lookout. Usually I send an email providing an update if there's a delay for any reason, but funding decisions are usually made in mid-May, and then those award disbursements by mid-June. If you're not applying in the spring but will be applying in the fall, the application submission deadline is October 1st, 2021. So for the spring, it's always May 15th. For the fall, it is October 1st. And we have another event where you can actually share your research. It's not a grant proposal, but you will be able to communicate your research to your colleagues, your peers, and that is our Student Research Showcase, which will be April 26th through May 10th, with the abstract submission deadline of March 26th, and our website, sigmaxi.org/SRS. And if you have additional questions beyond what we covered today in our session, make sure you contact myself, the manager of programs, or Lindsay Holton, our program coordinator. And our email is GIAR@sigmaxi.org. And if you are ready to start that application, you can go to our website, sigmaxi.org/GIAR. Again, I want to thank everyone that has attended our session. Thank you for our panelists taking some time out of their schedule today. And we look forward to seeing you at a future Sigma Xi program. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
You too.
Thank you,
Take care,
Janelle, for
everyone.
moderating.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank
Bye,
you. And thank
everybody.
you,
Bye.
Sigma
Bye.
Xi staff, for assisting. Thank you. Iman Ganem and Lindsay Holton. Thank you.
Yay.
Good luck, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Good
Thanks.
luck. Thank
Bye.
Bye.
you. Bye bye.